Good morning, everybody. This is Scott. Again, thank you for joining us on Stigma Busters as we help navigate multiple pathways and person-centered approaches to recovery. I'm joined by Crystal and Deshawn once again. Just to remind everybody that this is a safe place, and this month's podcast is to celebrate recovery, as September is Recovery Month. And we're also going to be talking about stigma and playing a short video on the impact of stigma culturally, cross-culturally, inside, outside, and around all communities around the world, and how the language and the words that we speak can really depict and change how we view ourselves and how others view others as well. And so, Crystal, Deshawn, thank you again for being part of this podcast and celebrating recovery this month. How are you guys?
Good, doing good. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me again.
Yes, thank you for having me back. I'm doing okay.
Awesome. So I'm just going to jump right into it because there's no better time than now. So the first stigmatizing term, let's talk about the most misused term, is addict, abuser, junkie. And the reason for the stigma behind these terms is that it's demeaning. It's labeling a person by their disorder, by their illness, that they are permanently placed into this condition that is negatively impacting their overall wellness, and that it doesn't really show that there's room for improvement or room for change within that status of having that illness. And the recovery movement has gone away from those terms and has started to use a person in or living with an addictive, with an active addiction, or a person with a substance use disorder, and not even really using the word drug or addiction at all. And so, Deshawn, what is your experience over the last year, a few years, regarding the stigmatizing term of addict, abuser, or junkie? You're muted.
As much as I try to use person-centered words when working with individuals, a lot of my experience says that a lot of individuals themselves call themselves the junkies, the addicts, and if that's what they so choose, then that's what they so choose. Like you said, we're meeting people where they're at. But I try to give them the alternative of, instead of saying you're a junkie, you're a person who you're a person who used to use drugs, or a former addict. You're a person you use drugs. You've done drugs. Don't call yourself an addict or junkie and stuff like that. But of course, again, some people refer themselves as junkies and addicts and stuff. So like I said, as much as if that's what they want to do, that's up to them. We can't tell them not to do it. I still try to give them other alternative words to call themselves.
Great feedback, Deshawn. How about you, Crystal?
For me, I think the word, specifically the word addict, is like progressive, right? In the beginning, it meant something different to me than it does now, because in the beginning, when I would go to a meeting and I had to stand up or raise my hand and say, hi, my name is Crystal and I'm an addict. In the beginning, I had to accept it, right? So I really had to get to a point where I said it and I believed it, because in order to get to the other side of it, I had to accept that part of me. And I think at one point that was very important, but now I don't identify that way, So I think that term has definitely changed for me through the progression of my recovery status and the things that I learn, and the self-awareness grows. And, you know, we learn to become a little bit more gentle with ourselves, and we don't have to be so harsh. Where in the beginning, I was very harsh on myself. So when we're talking about how we speak about ourselves, I was very harsh with myself, but I'm always gentle with others, right? So
Right.
I always want to use a gentle term when it comes to someone else, but I was always very rough with me. So
Mhm.
I've gotten better, definitely. It's always a work in progress, because you want to go back to those words that you're familiar with, right? But
Mhm.
it's changing it in total. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's that we can recover, right, from a hopeless state of mind and body, if that's where we've ended up, in that there is an opportunity for change. And I feel like if we label ourselves negatively, that how do we now transform into something that's positive? And loving ourselves on purpose starts with how we identify ourselves, right? If you identify with something that you're passionate and that you love, then you can use that to create SMART goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, reachable, and timely to achieve your pathway to happiness and joy. And so the next term, what about the term? I never really use these terms myself, but I know a lot of people have used it. The terms clean and dirty. I have lived many years of my life very physically and mentally dirty, unshowered, unbathed, um, no clean clothes. But I never, for me, again, never labeled myself as clean or dirty. And obviously, it, describes a drug test. You have a
Yeah.
clean drug test, you have a dirty urine.
Pop
Um,
up dirty.
right. But
Right.
that
You don't
that
want to
means
pop up
that
dirty.
I am the symptom of my illness. I'm not a symptom. I have a symptom of my illness, but that's not who I am. I'm not a negative drug screen, or I'm not a positive drug screen. That's filthy, right? So the opposite or the preferred term would be negative, positive, or substance free, right? I'm a person who identifies as in long-term recovery that has been substance free. So what do you think? Either one of you. Go ahead, Deshaun.
So it's funny because I remember having this conversation a long time ago. Um, the term dirty, you know, and especially in using this sense, has a whole negative, meaning to it. Like, people associate dirty with bad.
Right.
People associate dirty with, okay, unclean.
Hmm.
And it's just like, in your recovery, yes, there may be times where you have a positive urine, because we understand that relapse is a part of recovery,
Hmm.
but to use the negative connotations of like dirty and clean, it can definitely, um, I guess for lack of better words, uh, it could be almost segregating too, you know um the fact that, and especially if most people, know that you've had a like a negative, a positive urine, like Crystal said, you pop dirty, like, say, hearing someone say that to you, you've done, what you've done, but we don't need the negativity behind that, you know we don't need the, and then, you think the word clean, meaning good, is more positive, and it's not. you know um like I said, it's almost segregating, like someone who tests dirty and someone who tests clean, like, I that's all I have to say.
I kind of think it's like where you're at in the process, right? Like for
Mhm.
me, it takes me back to the beginning of my process. I was going
Hmm.
through family court. So it's like you go to court and you know you're going to get tested. You don't want to pop dirty. You don't want to come up dirty, right? You always want to
Hmm.
like have a clean drug test. But when you're in like kind of a negative frame of mind and you're with another group of people that's also going through that, it's easy to join together and be negative and use those negative terms because we already feel some type of way about ourselves.
Right.
Until we get to the other side of that and we don't want to keep using that language about ourselves, that's when it starts to change. So it's like just initiating that change so that we don't have to stay in that negative space. But because it's like real easy to be like, oh, came up dirty again, you know, and it's kind of like just like going with the crowd, if you will, not really, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's just like it keeps within that negative, like, I don't know, like vibe of it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And what there's so many, right? There's crackhead, there's pothead, there's problem drinker, heavy user, right? I'm a crackhead. I'm not a crackhead, I'm Scott.
Right.
I misused crack or cocaine, but that doesn't mean that's who I am,
Crackhead,
right?
exactly.
I was not born that way. I was born as Scott, and I misused whatever substance. And so I think that using the substance and saying I'm cocaine addicted or I'm alcoholic again, right, has its own stigmatizing attributes. But I think that it's derogatory. Like let's lift each other up. Let's lift ourselves up and say, hey, I am who I am, but I'm also aware of and powerless over the behaviors that accompanied with the misuse of a substance. And I think, like Crystal said, it really starts in the beginning. If you're in pre-contemplation, get connected with a peer, get connected to services that can uplift you and change your language, because that's going to allow you to look at yourself differently in the mirror.
Right.
I apologize. There's clients coming in and out of my building right now. So
Yeah, it's okay.
First day back.
Listen,
there's a lot of traffic today.
that's the world that we live in, that we dwell in, is that when the doorbell rings or the phone rings, that we're there to answer it and support those that are listening to this podcast or showing up at our buildings with nowhere else to go. So just keep doing the work that you're doing, and there's no need to be sorry. You know, and it's okay to be in recovery. Because everybody experiences recovery at some point in their life. And the stigma behind even the term recovery, oh, you had a problem with drugs. No, I didn't. I survived cancer. I survived sexual trauma. I survived a car accident where my spine was our vertebrae was refused 6 times over 15 surgeries. I lost my child at infancy due to an unknown illness or disease, right? So anyone, anywhere, at any time can be in recovery, and it's most likely going to happen to everybody at some point in their life. So recovery is not allocated to substances. It's allocated to substances, mental health, physical, any traumatic event that's happened to you in your life that you are now overcoming. You are in recovery from that. This summer, we're coming out of the summer. Someone that got sunburn, 3rd-degree sunburn, boils, blisters, and all the things. Your skin, your body is now recovering from sunburn. You are in recovery. Absolutely. And someone's in recovery when they say they are. That's the key.
That is the key.
You say you're in recovery? Great, me too. Let's go.
Exactly. And even, you know, in talking about stigma, just being a person that is able to say, I'm a person in recovery. When you stand up and say that, that means a lot. And, you know, it's always like touchy. Like, do I want to tell people I'm in recovery? Like, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? Right. So like when it comes to Facebook and social media and posting, you know, recovery month comes around and I'll be the first one to stand up and say, hi, my name's Crystal and I'm proud and I'm in recovery.
Yep.
And like, this is what my recovery means to me. And
Mhm.
even though it hasn't been like, oh, day one, I stepped in recovery and my life has been rainbows and unicorns and it's just been sunshine ever since, you know, that's not what it's about. It's about being real, and like struggles still happen. It's just how we deal with our struggles now. We deal with it in a different way, in a healthy way, in a recovering way, in a healing way.
Right.
And, you know, that's really powerful. And it means a lot when you can stand up and say that and be proud of it. It takes the stigma away when you
Mhm.
show that it's okay to be the person that you are.
I myself am in recovery, not from substances but mental health. I don't think of it as, a bad thing. I think of, if anything, recovery is, I'm like, instead, I take me saying I'm in recovery as I'm healing. I'm in
Right.
healing. You
Perfect.
know, I'm in healing. And like you said, Scott, if especially the word recovery nowadays, it people, most people go straight to the addiction, and it's just like, well, no, I don't suffer from, addiction. I have mental health. I suffer from mental health issues that I am working on and healing from, and recovering from.
I got one for you. I'm recovering from a spiritual illness.
Oh, that's a good one. I had one of those once.
Right? The
Yeah.
language has such power and such impact on the way that we view ourselves and the world around us. And William White once said, in the end, language matters. The labels applied to individuals affect how they perceive by others and how they perceive themselves. Stigma and discrimination are couched in a language that reinforces stereotypes and elicits fear. Right, the fear of, oh, you're a crackhead, right? That's the stigma behind them. I hate, one of my least favorite is crackhead, because the stigma is you're gonna rob, steal, beat me up. No, they're just searching, in my eyes, God. They're replacing God with the substance.
Substance,
And in
yes.
order to fill that gap that only God can fill, they need money, clothes, and all the other things that you may have because you're not spiritually ill.
And it really does come down to how do we feel about ourselves, right? Like, because in the beginning, when you say like a spiritual illness, spiritual bankruptcy, like, you know, just spiritually empty, it's hard to get back to that place of spiritual fullness. But I think on that journey of that is like when we start to like relearn who we are and figure out what we want, and, you know, all the things that actually bring us true joy again. And being able to be okay with that is what changes the stigma, you know, like
Right.
being accepting of all of it in the end.
Yeah.
Cool.
Whether you are, William White also said, whether you are the one struggling, a loved one, or simply want to be better educated as a parent or a leader, the language must change. We need to be very clear about what we are talking about. We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about inanimate objects. We're not talking about a seltzer or a spray bottle or a computer. We're talking about a human life that has value and importance. And we need to give back that value and that importance to that individual so they can fulfill their purpose for their life and make sure their dash on their tombstone has substance and purpose.
And that's whether they're using or they're not. It
Doesn't matter,
even
right?
if they're still using, they're still a person and they still should be valued as such. And that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah. I am versus I am not. I am Scott. I am not a substance. Right? I am who I say I am. I am in recovery. That's it. If I said my name's Scott and I'm not in recovery today, that I'm not in recovery today. And no one can change that for me because I have authority over how I view my life.
And I like how you said, like, I'm a survivor of, like, I'm a survivor of trauma. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm a survivor of so much loss. You know, I'm a survivor. I am not a victim. I'm not.
Nope.
I thought I was for a really long time, but I'm not. I'm a survivor.
That's right. So we're gonna play a 9-minute video, the best explanation of addiction I've ever heard, by Dr. Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate.
Oh, you said it.
Thousands of people inhaling and ingesting drugs of all kinds.
Can you hear?
And paying dearly for it. These people are often outside the law, certainly beset by many medical problems due to injection drug use, including psychosis, including HIV, including hepatitis C, cancers. They die of overdoses. This is trench warfare, and the people that are the frontline soldiers dying from it are the people affected by addiction. So that's where I worked for 12 years. And what I learned could be summed up really very briefly by saying that addiction is not a choice that anybody makes, it's not a moral failure, it's not an ethical lapse, it's not a weakness of character, it's not a failure of will, which is how our society depicts addiction, nor is it an inherited brain disease, which is how the medical tendency is to see it. What it actually is, it's a response to human suffering. And all these people that I worked with had been severely traumatized as children. All the women had been sexually abused. All the men had been traumatized, some of them sexually, physically, emotionally neglected. And not only is that my perspective, it's also what the scientific and research literature shows. So addiction then is actually, rather than being a disease as such or a human choice, it actually is, it's an attempt to escape suffering temporarily. By the time I went to work there, I had already been in family practice for 20 years. I'd seen a lot, and I was quite attuned to the impact of early childhood experiences on adult psychology and adult brain physiology. But I just hadn't seen the depth and the degree until I went to work down there. So really it dramatized and confirmed for me, made it very palpable how addictions are a response to suffering, and that what people need in response to addiction is not judgment and not simply symptom control. They need to be helped to heal from their trauma, because it is all about trauma.
If you don't learn how to own your future, pornography addiction will own it for you.
The media, the television, cultural depiction of addicts is usually as desperate people, but without showing why they're desperate. So all that shows is the desperation for the drugs. There's no indication of what's driving that desperation. And hence you see them behaving in all kinds of dysfunctional ways, aggressive or manipulative or unpleasant. But again, there's no three-dimensional sense of the reality of these people as to what that's really all about for them. Is it possible to cure people? You're speaking from the Western model, where I am the expert, and you're the one with the disease, and I'm going to cure you, like you cure a piece of meat, you know. No. The answer to that question, framed that way, is no, it's not possible. If you're asking, is it possible for people to heal from trauma sufficiently that they don't have to keep escaping into addictions to lessen the suffering of their trauma? Yes, that's entirely possible. But the question is, under what conditions is that possible? And under the conditions that obtain in London, UK, or Vancouver, British Columbia, or New York, or any place, under the conditions that obtain socially, legally, and from the perspective of medical practice, it's hardly a likelihood, because we're approaching it from the wrong direction and with the wrong perspective. If I could constantly demonstrate that with this particular population, I could affect a 5 or 10% success rate of getting people to leave their addictions behind, I'd be considered to be a genius. because our results are so poor. When I say ours, I don't mean ours specifically in Vancouver. I don't mean that. I mean the overall treatment model for addiction is so poor in succeeding with the most affected segments of the population. So, I mean, addictions are like everything else on a spectrum. So a lot of people do heal from addictions, but the most inveterate, most entrenched addicts, they have the hardest time. And they're also the ones whom society gives the hardest time, so that it makes it even harder to help them. Never mind they don't get the help they need, they actually get actively punished. And so what you've actually got is traumatized children. When children are traumatized, that affects how they feel about themselves, which is deeply ashamed, because a child always believes that it's about himself. So if I'm being hurt like this, I gotta be a terrible person. Or if I was sexually abused, why didn't I fight back? I must be a very weak person. So there's a deep sense of shame. Then there's tremendous emotional pain that accrues from abuse and neglect. Tremendous emotional pain that is hardly possible for people to bear. Now they have to soothe their pain with substances or other compulsive behaviors. Then the trauma itself, given that the human brain develops an interaction with the environment, shapes the brain circuitry in such a way that the person will be more likely to find relief from the drugs. So the very physiology of the brain is affected by early trauma. So then you take these traumatized people and you make their habit illegal. It's not illegal to drink yourself to death. It's not illegal to make yourself sick with emphysema or lung cancer by means of cigarettes, but it's illegal to use other substances. So now you take these abused, traumatized people, you place them outside the law, you put them in jails, and you hound them all their lives, treating them like criminals and bad people and failures and rejects and less than human. And then we wonder how come they don't get better. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle of taking traumatized people and then re-traumatizing them, and then hoping at the same time, why don't they listen? Why don't they get better already? Why don't they give it up? Well, they don't give it up because the more hurt they are, the more they need to escape. In other words, the addiction wasn't your problem. Your problem was that you had a lot of emotional pain, you didn't know what to do with. So the addiction was really an attempt to solve a problem. So when you say, why do people use substances or why do they engage in addictions in general, it's because they have a problem they don't know what to do with. And if you really understand their addiction, we have to ask, well, what gave you so much emotional pain? And how come you didn't have the internal resources? This is not a judgment, it's simply an inquiry. How come you lacked at some point the internal resources to deal with that pain in a more creative, forward-looking way that would help you resolve the pain rather than to perpetuate it? So really what it was is that the addiction came along to help you solve a problem you had no other solutions for at the time. And that's the case for all addictions. So why do people use? Why do people engage in addictions? Because they have deep emotional problems they don't have the means to resolve on their own. That's why they use.
Do you know that there are natural ways to overcome ADHD, autism, and other behavioral challenges that...
The average medical student, until very recently, has never even heard the word trauma in their education. It doesn't show up. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about its impact on the brain, on the personality, on the emotional life of people, on its impact on people's physical health. It's not a word that we mention. We're traumaphobic. As a fellow doctor said to me, the medical profession is traumaphobic. Psychiatrists these days are trained mostly in this biological model of psychiatry where everything comes down to a biological brain disease. Here, let's give you a pill. The last thing most psychiatrists know how to talk about is actually emotional pain or its origins in human experience. You'd think they'd know how to do that, but they don't. They're not trained in it. It's not part of the predominant medical ideology. And, you know, as a physician, I can tell you, we like to think of medicals as a science, and it has certainly great scientific achievements to its credit and great scientific insights to buttress its successes. But it's as much as ideology as science. And ideology has certain hidden assumptions that are hidden from the people that believe in ideology. And so that if something is excluded by your ideology, you just won't see it. And so that you can be talking to somebody about your addiction, And the simple question, what did they do for you? And how come you're in so much emotional pain, doesn't occur to anybody, trained in a classical manner. Now, this is true not just for physicians, it's true for a lot of psychologists as well, who are more interested in solving your problems and getting you to overcome the behavior than in asking, well, okay, where does this behavior come from? And what are you still carrying inside that's making you behave that way? And how can we help you resolve what's inside you? Not just how do we help you change your behavior, but how do we help you change? Now that's what healing is. And that happens inside a person. So it's never a question of anybody curing anybody else, but we can guide people to healing if we ask the right questions.
You're welcome.
I don't
love
really,
him.
I really don't have anything to follow up with that. I think his words were more than
On the point.
adequate to explain itself.
On the
That
money.
we're just recovering from trauma, from emotional hurts and emotional misplacements, and that we don't have the necessary tools to recover from them at whatever age, or we've never developed those internal. And for me, in my walk and in my recovery, it is simply replacing those resources with the resources from God. He has complete control over my life. My actions and my thoughts come directly from my higher power, because left up to my own devices, I'm going to slip back into my misuse of substances, of people and places. And so what I've learned is that I need God to direct all of my life. Because of the emotional hurt, I don't have adequate resources or tools. I do now, right? Because I've been in recovery for a while, but in early recovery, I didn't. And I had to seek out something greater than myself. So thank you so much, Crystal, for that video.
Absolutely. I could listen to him speak all day long. All of his videos are my favorite videos.
Mhm.
He's just amazing. And the way that he talks about it, it's not shameful in any kind of way. It's just a matter of fact. Like, this happened, so that happened, and the addiction is just like secondary to your trauma. And it's so true. Like, I never understood that, because I always say, like, I'm a late bloomer. I didn't start using till I was almost 30. I was like in my late 20s when I started using, and I had just gone through a very traumatic experience. I lost a baby at almost full term, and I was prescribed pain pills. Have some pills. Well, not only did it take the pain away, but it took all the pain away, the emotional pain, the trauma, the everything. I didn't know how to deal with that, and I already had a child. So it's like you pull your pants up and you just keep going, and you live in survival mode. I lived in survival mode for years. I was not living. I was just on the hamster wheel, just like they showed, right? And then when I started to understand, my addiction was just a symptom of my trauma. I needed to heal my trauma and heal my heart and heal my wounds and love myself again, because I lost that. And it's truly, at the end of the day, it's how we feel about ourselves, and it's empowering ourselves to get through it.
I like
So go ahead, Deshaun.
I'm sorry, excuse me. I like how he mentioned how, when people don't have the internal ability to deal with a problem, they look for um external solutions, and that's what addiction is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be addiction. Some people like to eat, some people like to go to the gym, some people, that's their external coping mechanism. You understand what I'm saying? Like, we don't sometimes we don't get to choose our external coping mechanism. Sometimes it's kind of just put in our face, and we're thinking, hey, this is what's going to help us feel better. This is what's going to help us deal with on the outside deal with what we're dealing with on the inside.
And he used the word temporarily.
Temporarily, yes, because it
That
never
was
lasts.
huge. It never
Because
lasts, and you'll never get
never
that same
lasts.
feeling back ever again.
Always the
Exactly.
Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Always the Band-Aid.
So let's celebrate now, right? It's Recovery Month, and this is for all of those that are listening or watching, and you're celebrating recovery with us. Crystal, tell us a little bit of what's happening in New York State with the recovery movement.
So the recovery movement all over New York State, there's a ton of events going on always. Here locally in Poughkeepsie, we have a walk over the walkway on September 25th. I know you guys have some stuff going on, but I'm very closely involved with Friends of Recovery New York, and you can always go on their website. There's events happening all the time in every county. I couldn't even begin to list them all, to be honest. But they always have advocacy events around the entire year that I have been very involved in over the past couple of years. Everything is pretty much virtual now, but we have like Stand Up for Recovery Day. We have Federal Day of Action where we talk to the senators and legislators. We fight for bills and policy. We have our Fine Arts Festival where, you can get involved with photography and painting. They have a dance section now when you can showcase whatever your talents are. And it's just so amazing. We have Fund Recovery Days where we fight for recovery funding for treatment centers, for housing, for transportation, for all those things. There's just so many ways to get involved around the state, and doing different advocacy events is what really drives me, and it keeps me really focused to always continue doing the right thing, right? I have so many people that depend on me now around the state, and so many great recovery friends that it's they keep me in the loop. They keep me doing all the good stuff, and it keeps my heart so full.
Yeah, and so like Crystal said, we have a recovery picnic happening on September 17th between 2 and 3 p.m. at Thomas Bull Memorial Park in
Montgomery.
in Montgomery. So it's free. There's a registration on our Facebook page. Foods, drinks, kids, dogs, spouses, neighbors, everybody come out, and just a good time celebrating recovery and being with, like Crystal said, just people that understand the work and the walk that we're doing. And so I love Recovery Month because it's just a way not just to celebrate our own personal experiences, but to really become advocates and to become voices for those that may not be educated. It allows us to learn innovative strategies and tactics, whether it's at the grassroots in your community or at a state or a national level. You can go on mobilerecovery.org. It's a national coalition that every year they send out a recovery van that they actually do a tour throughout the entire country. And they have different spots, and you can attend the event, and they're like Las Vegas. They go down to Arizona, New York, Michigan. Where else are they going to be? California, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Iowa, Georgia. It's just amazing that it's not just your neighborhood, that this recovery movement is happening nationally and internationally as well. So that's just some other great tools. You gonna say something, Crystal?
I was going to add that the beginning of next month, we have for New York's, I say for New York, it's Friends of Recovery New York. We have our recovery conference, our annual recovery conference. It's usually 2 to 3 days long. It's been virtual for the past couple of years due to COVID, obviously. But I will be presenting yet again. So it's just awesome that I was like a newbie, and they were like, hey, join us, be a presenter. And I was like,
Yeah.
cool. And this is my 3rd year now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just feel so honored that they just scooped me up.
Yeah.
Like, thanks, guys.
And it's funny is Crystal, we don't think that people listen. And, a few weeks ago, I actually got invited to be the speaker in NADAC, right? The National Coalition for Substance Use Counselors. So I'm going to be traveling down to Indianapolis to speak on peer support at a national level. And I'm like, I just bought the tickets and I'm like, someone's really paying this much for me to come and speak? Like, I'm right at the base core of it is I'm a peer, but then my spouse said, that's God working through us. He gave us the experiences that we've had. So now he's using us to help others at any level. There's no limit to what we can do in celebrating, promoting, and advocating recovery for all walks of life.
It's very cool. And it's nice when, you think that nobody's listening and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, somebody is listening to me. And it's cool because the thing that I get to speak on, it's Y12SR, it's yoga 12-step recovery, which integrates a lot of codependency work. And for me, codependency is at the core of my addiction, right? Like I believe truly that I would have never become addicted if I was not a codependent already. Codependency is like my number one, addiction was my number two. So being able to deal with the two of them together is just like amazing. And being able to learn the things that I've learned over the past years, it's so beautiful to be able to share that with other people. And, women that are like so tough on the outside and they have this tough exterior. And then you see them on the side and they're like, oh my gosh, like, thank you. So, you just get to see a different side of people that you wouldn't necessarily always get to see. And it's just really cool.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the celebration is that we have to celebrate each other.
For sure.
And I feel like that's one of the callings that we created this podcast is we're celebrating you, whether you're watching or listening. If you may never see us, you don't have access to the video and you just have the audio, that I truly in my heart am celebrating you every day, because without the people to celebrate, then I'm just another guy sitting in the corner waiting for an opportunity. And my opportunity has been to celebrate life with everyone that I can come in contact with. So I celebrate you, Crystal. I celebrate you, Deshawn. I celebrate everybody listening or watching on this podcast. And that concludes this month's podcast. So again, thank you for joining, listening, participating, and allowing us to be the voices for recovery in this realm and in this space. And again, as always, and as my background says, just be authentic, be you. Your words are powerful. So love yourself ferociously on person. You have the authority to determine how you live your life, how much happiness and joy you can instill within your heart and within your mind, and free yourselves from the behaviors and the hurts that may dwell within inside of you, because they are not who you are. They are what happened to you. And because what they happen to you doesn't mean that you have to be that anymore, that you can change, that you can overcome, and you can survive anything as long as you stay truthful and authentic to yourself. So my name's Scott, and I love myself on purpose today.
My name is Crystal, and I love myself on purpose today. And stay tuned for what's next.
Oh, yeah.
My name is Deshawn, and I love myself on purpose today.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.